Hello and welcome back to the Raspberry 8 podcast. Today I am joined by Pat Divilly. Pat is a very difficult guy to try and define. He has many strings to his bow. He started out as a fitness coach and has since moved into more of the wellness space, sort of specializing in mental and emotional wellness. He's written books, he is a public speaker, and he has his own very successful podcast. He's also a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and absolutely loves the sport. I met Pat back in 2019 on a Jiu-Jitsu camp, and we've been meaning to do a podcast ever since. In this episode, we cover a wide range of topics, including talking about his journey through the fitness world and how he's got into the stuff that he's doing now, what he's doing now. We have a deep chat about stuff like masculinity and the problems that men may be facing in modern society, as well as talking about just general a lot of the concepts and ideas that he promotes and pushes. A really, really interesting chat with a very interesting guy, and I hope you guys enjoy listening. Check it out. Pat, what was it, 3.5 years ago we met, and we've been talking about doing a podcast ever since?
I was just going to say, three years in the making. Yeah.
I mean, we stayed in contact the whole time, and I can't believe that I haven't seen you since back at the camp in Tenerife. How you been?
I've been good. A lot has happened since then.
A lot has happened since then.
It's probably more than 3.5 years when you take the whole...
Yeah, it was actually, it was 2019. Wow. It was October 2019.
Wow. That was a great week.
Yeah, it was. That was hard.
Yeah?
That was the hardest week I've ever had.
Really?
Teaching jiu-jitsu. Yeah, because it was like crazy hot. There was no aircon in the hotel. I don't do well in the heat. And it was a morning session, an afternoon session, and a sparring session. And I thought, when I went out there, I thought that Ben would be doing half the sessions. And then I got out there and I was like, Ben, what sessions do you want to do? He was like, nah, lad, it's yours. It's like, oh, shit.
I think I heard... I've been a fan of your podcast for years. I think I heard Ben on the podcast is what brought me to that camp.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah, that was a great week.
It was a good week there, yeah.
It was a good reminder for me, actually, just in the context of life, of really going in on something, which is something I really like that you've done with your jiu-jitsu in terms of the guillotine. Yeah,
I think the depth is underrated, I think. And I think you can go too far in that direction and you can get too obsessed with a single thing. You want to have a nice balance between breadth and depth, but if you never go deep on at least one thing, you're missing out.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more, even now with years of being so into the guillotine, I'll still be discovering things on the mat every day about it. So yeah, it's fun.
I've been on a Kimura adventure for the last year.
I love Kimura.
Oh my God.
I talk about the Kimura and the guillotine as being very, very similar in terms of people see them as submissions, but they're control positions. Those are the two big ones. Those are the number 1 and 2 submissions that are actually control positions. And if you just use a guillotine as a sub, or you just use a Kimura as a shoulder lock, you're missing out on most of what it can do. So Kimura is fantastic. It's a fantastic position. Yeah.
Drika Platas.
yeah. I don't do those though. I don't do those. No.
Oh.
Maybe I like. I just like grabbing onto someone's arm and bending it behind. It's good fun. Anyway, mate, how you been?
Yeah, I've been well. Ups and downs of life, I suppose. There's definitely been challenging times over the last couple of years, but there's been, I've been well. It's been so long. I'm in a good flow at the moment of training. I think the couple of years during lockdown, I kind of shifted my work from, I suppose, more broad personal development work to going more into working with men. So that's been really enjoyable the last couple of years, just helping men in the mental health space. And the connection space, I suppose, bringing men together. So that's a big passion now. That's
something that we're going to get into because it's something that I'm really interested in, and I want to get your take on it because I know that is where the majority of your work is at the moment. But just for people who aren't too familiar with your background, you kind of started in the fitness space, right? As a fitness coach.
Yeah, I think I was telling you earlier, when I was 18, I went to the States because I wanted to be a cage fighter. And
really?
I had boxed, I had done Thai boxing, I had done judo, I had done a little bit of jiu-jitsu in my teens, but I was no good. Yeah. Not because I didn't have talent, I just wasn't committed. I liked the idea. I was like the guy that had all the I didn't actually have all the tap out gear, but I was that guy.
But that cliche,
yeah. I liked the idea of it more than I did actually training. But I went to the States for 6 months when I was 18 to train at a gym called Undisputed.
Yeah.
So Dominic Cruz was the main guy back then.
Even just Undisputed is such a sort of early 2000s style of MMA.
Affliction shirts.
And
Dominic Cruz was there. War Machine was there. I think Dominic had just signed to the UFC. He had fought Uriah Faber in WEC. So it was somewhat early days. So I trained out there for 6 months. And I had a mentor called Eric Coleman, who was a kettlebell guy. So at the time, this is like 2006 maybe. I had been into fitness, but like kettlebells hadn't made it to Ireland, TRX and stuff like that hadn't made it to Ireland. So I looked up to this guy. I thought he was like, he was just, for me, like I'd sit with him on the beach and I'd say, am I delusional thinking I can do this cage fighting thing? Because I'd look around the gym and there was a lot of people that were like weekend warriors and they'd think that they were going to be fighters. I was like, am I one of them, Eric? He'd be like, no, you can do this, you can do that. He showed me a lot of belief that I didn't have, I suppose. But he was struggling a lot with his own mental health. So he was 28, I was 18. And when I came back to Ireland, I found out that he had taken his life, which I suppose woke me up a little bit at that time, that I was in college studying geography, even though I had no interest in that. And I thought, there's more to life than, I got to do something different. It was sobering for me at 18 to lose a friend in that way, and then lost another couple of friends in a short couple of months. So that prompted me to jump 2 feet into the fitness stuff. Moved to England for a year, did a master's in exercise and nutrition science, and actually worked in a gym over here whilst doing the master's, which was 40 hours a week working in the gym. But rather than being a gym instructor, all the students got free PT. So people would come in on a Sunday and they'd book their PTs for the week. So in the space of that year, I got to work with professional athletes, got to work with people with cardiac rehabilitation, people in wheelchair, like every type of clients. And I think when I got into the fitness space, I thought I want to be a strength and conditioning coach. And then I worked with a few athletes, and I was like, I don't want to be a strength and conditioning coach.
They're the biggest pain in the arse in the world.
Because you're the if something goes wrong, you're blamed. I remember a story back then. I don't know if I have this right, but I think someone said that Liverpool Football Club had introduced kettlebells, or their strength and conditioning guy had introduced kettlebells, and one of the players got injured or something like that. So they blamed the coach and they blamed the kettlebells. It turned out whatever flooring they had put in the training ground had been what the issue was, but the strength and conditioning guy often is the first guy to get blamed.
Easy scapegoat, especially when you bring in something a little bit different.
Yeah. And a lot of athletes think they're the next big thing, so they don't want to pay. Anyway, I got a lot of fulfillment from working with average Joes and Janes. So I moved back to Dublin. I started a fitness company there, failed pretty miserably. And I came back to Galway. So I'm from Galway, smaller town in Ireland.
And I'll just interject just quickly. If anyone wants to hear the more fleshed out version of that story, then the TED Talk that you did, 6-7 years ago, you tell that story in great detail with a great message to it. But if anyone's interested in searching Pat, his TEDx talk is great. Anyway, carry on.
Thank you. I just share briefly on TED. I'll go off on tangents, but I remember TEDx. I had gotten into public speaking a little while before that, and I was terrified of public speaking. And I had done a couple of workshops that were like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours. And so TEDx, you're given up to 18 minutes to share your message. So I thought, this is going to be easy. But someone then said to me, well, 2 hours or 3 hours, you can mess up and you can pull it back into the right place. They said 18 minutes. There's no coming back.
Man, whilst you're off on a tangent, I mean, this is something that interests me a lot about public speaking. I think it's something that maybe a lot of people... You talk for a living, basically. You do a lot of retreats, you do workshops, you do public speaking, you've done it for a long time. I, not quite to the same extent, but because it's not as rehearsed, I guess, but like I do commentary and stuff like that. It's the same sort of thing. I feel like a lot of people out there won't have the practice, but may still at some point in their life, maybe just once, twice, 3 times, might have to give a presentation, might have to give a talk, might have to, even if it's something like a best man speech at a wedding or something like that. What tips after many, many years of doing that stuff, what are kind of the biggest tips that you have for getting over some of the main hurdles of public speaking?
Don't be close enough to any male in your life that you're going to have to be a best man. Probably the main thing. My friend recently, he's getting married, and he said, don't worry, bro, you'll be on the altar with me. And I was like, who's your best man? And he said someone else. I was like, oh. I've
done a best man speech, and that was
scary.
That was the worst thing I've ever done in my life.
Scarier than TV, I'm sure.
It is scarier than TV. Yeah. Because I also I officiated my sister's wedding.
Cool.
Which was way easier because I was reading. It was way easier because, very simply, you don't have to be funny. And that is the killer in a best man speech. I think best man is the hardest speech because you're expected to make people laugh, and that is a very, very different thing to just trying to get some information across. So yeah, that's a good first piece of advice. Don't have any close male friends.
And on the laughter thing, I remember I did a talk a couple of years ago for, I think it was 200 nurses. I get all these random jobs, I talk about stress reduction, the mind-body connection, how we speak to ourselves, all these different topics around mental health. But I was speaking to 200 nurses, and I think I was 24, maybe a bit older, 28 at the time. And I like to get a laugh out of the audience. It kind of puts me at ease. But I guess the first tip will be take your time when you get up on stage. So I'm introduced on stage and they said, this guy has achieved so much for such a young man. And I got up on stage and I wanted to straight away, like without even thinking, I wanted to make them laugh. So I said, I'm not actually that young. It's just my amazing skincare routine that I'll be sharing with you today. I'm actually in my 50s. And then I looked across the room and I was like, there's like 200 people in their 50s in the room, And it's like when you're 18, you think someone who's 25 is old, or you're 25, And so it's a very lonely place when things don't go to plan up on stage. So I spent like 2 hours speaking to them. And then I was like, has anyone got any questions? And some lady's like,
what's your skincare routine?
What's wrong with being 50? And I was like, oh no. But tips for public speaking. One that I have to remind myself of all the time, like, I guess in psychology, there's this idea of the spotlight effect, that we walk through life thinking there's a spotlight on us and everyone's noticing our insecurities and our fears and our imperfections. And oftentimes, obviously, when you're on stage, you can make it all about yourself. How am I going to look? How are people going to perceive me? So if you can go from kind of seeing it as being about self to seeing it as about service, that can be something that creates a shift. So as opposed to me trying to take your approval, if I get up on stage and I want you to like me and I want to win you over, there's kind of me there's a neediness in that of I'm trying to take from you. But if I go up there and say, what could I give these people? Like, what could I share here from the heart, or what could I share from my personal experience? So I would say, try to come from a place of service and think about the people in front of you. Maybe somewhat tied in with like the idea of imposter syndrome, where there's this thing of, I don't know, maybe you'd have it with releasing a jiu-jitsu instruction where you're like, oh, well, I've had high-level jiu-jitsu guys share that with me, that they're like, well, John Danaher has already released, like, that's, so how could I do it? I think a lot of the fear with public speaking comes to that imposter of like, who am I to share? And when we're so close to all our own experiences in life, so when you're so close to jiu-jitsu for the last 18 years or whatever it's been, you probably have no idea how much you know, and you just need to be one step ahead of the audience. I think that's an important piece, just to, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And relating it to jiu-jitsu, it's sort of you don't have to be tons better than someone to tap them out easily. You only got to be a little bit better than them, know. So I think that it works both ways. Where in order to beat someone, assuming everything else is equal, you only got to be a couple of steps ahead of them. You don't have to be 10 years ahead of them. And yeah, I think that applies to stuff like that. To bring value to someone else, you only need to know a little bit more than what they know, and be able to pass that over to them.
The other couple of things, I suppose. Don't try to impress people. That's something I saw in the fitness industry. Like, I was in the fitness industry 2012 to 2016, and I had 20,000 clients in that time. Wow. Mostly online. I started on the beach, and I grew this community in my hometown. And then a lot of my generation had gone to Australia and Canada and immigrated because of the recession. So they started asking, like, how do I train? And I put the programs online. But a lot of my peers in the fitness industry wanted to impress other trainers. They were trying to like show how much they knew, and I can use these fancy words to describe like the different muscle groups, and I know 50 different push-up variations. And my thing was, I might just know one push-up, but if I can make someone who doesn't believe they can do a push-up, that's the skill set. Like, so I think maybe that applies in the public speaking space. Like, am I trying to impress people, or am I trying to like help people improve in some capacity?
Like, it doesn't matter what you know, it's about your ability not just to pass that information on, but in some way, as a coach especially, the real skill set is being able to connect with the person that you're working with.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. A lot of the feedback I get is, you haven't shared anything I didn't already know, but you said it in a way that kind of makes me think it's possible, or makes me think, I need to focus maybe on the basics a bit more, stuff like that. Yeah, I think those are some of the bits. And then obviously the practice piece. Like, I have a mantra in life that you get better at what you practice.
100%.
And like, it sounds so simple, but we become what we practice. So if I practice stepping away from fearful situations, then I'm practicing being fearful. If I practice stepping in and saying yes when I'm afraid of saying yes, I'm practicing courage. And over time, that makes an impact. Like you shared with me, you've probably done 45 Cage Warriors shows, or a lot of Cage Warriors shows. I'm sure the first one was,
honestly, the first Cage Warriors we did, because it was a big step up. I've done lots of other live broadcast stuff, but the Cage Warriors is a big step up from a Polaris or any of the other shows I've done. Big lights, big audience, it's going out to a lot of people. And I remember the first couple of shows that we did where we were doing the openers, and you're standing with a microphone, co-commentator next to me, you're looking at this camera. I remember the first couple of events, the light that they had on this camera was blinding. Honestly, you close your eyes and it's burnt into your retina. And then you got in your ear, okay, we're live in 30, 20, 10, and the whole time, oh shit. Because what you want, they're going to go, and we're live, and you start talking, and you just don't want to go, and it's just like, what do you do at that point? It's like live TV. There's nothing that you can't really claw that back. And it really is, it's quite amazing as I've gone through how much easier that gets every single time. Literally just putting reps in the bank of that stuff to the point now where, and then I kind of stepped up at Polaris to do the hosting, which again, first couple of times that I hosted, you're standing on the mat, you're the first person who's going to talk, you're introducing the show, absolutely shitting it. The first show I did, which was the Team USA versus Team Brazil in Cardiff last year, and I remember the show, we went, it was a long show, we started at 3:30 and we came off air at like past 11 o'clock. I didn't eat a single thing the entire time. I was so nervous, like switched on the entire time. And now when I do a show, it's you get a little bit of excitement, but the nerves aren't there like it was before. So even in a relatively small amount, the change from the first couple of shows that I did to now is massive.
Yeah. The last thing maybe on the public speaking, I mean, there's a million things you could say, but something I've find useful with like overcoming fears or like stepping into the unknown, if you will, is I say like if I imagine fear being like a wall, and the magnitude of the fear is represented by the height of the wall. So the bigger the fear, the bigger the wall. It makes no sense for me to try and climb a massive wall unless there's something on the other side that's exciting to move toward. And unless being on this side of the wall kind of sucks. So for me, when I started doing the public speaking years ago, it was the last thing in the world I wanted to do. But I didn't like where I was in life. I was like not happy. I was unfulfilled. I didn't like living in fear. I felt I had more to offer. And so the wall, like this side of the wall represented safety and kind of, I guess, death, like dying in a way, like everything in nature grows or it dies. And the other side of the wall for me was growth. So the reason I say that is, I suppose in recent years with the wellness industry, particularly during the pandemic and stuff, I saw like everyone's becoming a life coach all of a sudden. Everyone's becoming it, which is, great if it's what you want to do. But I think you have to do things that are like true for yourself, and you have to figure out like the why. I guess like it's kind of cliche, but like why am I doing what I'm doing? So for me, the public speaking, partially it was I had reached a point. I talk about my friend taking his own life when I was 18, and I reached a point when I was 24 where I was in a similar position. I was just so lost, and part of my wanting to step into my fears and stuff was like, I don't want to be back in that place of just feeling dead inside. And that's what drove me. So there's a couple of things. Figure out your why. Recognize you get better at what you practice. You've got to practice the things. Make it about the group in front of you as opposed to about yourself. And I think that climbing the wall and moving it towards your fear to get better at whatever you're scared of, that doesn't apply to just public speaking. That really is everything. Anything that you want that you're fearful of, and there's a barrier, a metaphorical barrier. Like you said, getting to the other side. If you think that barrier is worth crossing, you got to go for it, right? There's an amazing exercise I came across a couple of years ago, like a journaling kind of a written piece. And I thought we've got our conscious awareness, like the things that are, okay, I'm aware that, I've got these insecurities and I'm aware of this. And then we've got the unconscious stuff that's like below the surface of the iceberg, if you will. And that's really what drives us, I think, the unconscious fears. And so there was this exercise that someone shared with me where you think about something you'd like. So you might say, I want to open a jiu-jitsu gym. So this is my dream. I want to open a jiu-jitsu gym, or I want to have an intimate relationship. Like that's my dream. And you would write on a piece of paper, I absolutely refuse to have an intimate relationship because I'm terrified that. And then you just move the pen for 10 minutes and all this stuff comes up where you're like, I'm going to lose my freedom. Not going to be enough. And it's really interesting to like recognize those fears that are in the background and just hold them out in front of you and be like, okay, this is what's driving me. Because when you're aware of something, Anthony de Mello said that. He was a famous Jesuit priest. He said, what you're aware of, you're in control of. But what you're not aware of is in control of you. So this is like a shadow work thing of like bringing the unconscious.
Well, I was going to say that's Jungian, right? That he would tell you to have a conversation with the shadow part of yourself and literally write down as I'm saying this and then what are they saying back. And this, I think when you get into the flow of writing, that can happen where your subconscious you open a small crack in the window and it's able to come through and show itself a little bit. But that's really interesting.
I think it's who is it? There's a spiritual teacher, I've forgotten who it is, but she talks about when you write, she says oftentimes when we write there's different part. We all have these different parts, these different characters. So I have a confident part, I have an insecure part, I have a wounded inner child, I have a hero, I have a dominant character, I have a passive. I have all these different parts of myself that show up in different times. And usually when we write, the first part that comes in is the judge or the critic that's like, nah, that doesn't make sense. That's not enough. You're So one of these teachers talks about just getting into a practice, if you're going to write, of just writing and tell that part of you to step outside of the room. So no critic allowed in here for the next 10 minutes. And that's when the unconscious stuff comes through. Because you've got all these protective parts that want to keep you as you are. Okay, you're Pat, you're a coach and you're this and you're this, but you're not anything outside of that. And so my ego wants to keep me in that. But when I tell my editor to get out of the room, maybe my writing says, allow yourself to dance, allow yourself to do this and this. And there's like, oh, there's other possibilities, you know?
No, that's fascinating. Okay, let's get back on where we were talking about. We were talking about fitness and I mean, it's a great tangent. That's what my favorite thing to do on the podcast is you have a discussion, you see where it takes you, right? You've got to let it grow organically.
I'll go all over the place.
Perfect. But yeah, we're talking about fitness and your journey in fitness and sort of, I guess more importantly, out of fitness. So what was it that, and you've kind of alluded a little bit to what was going on around that, but it seems that you have, you know, since you built this fitness business, and you started to go into public speaking, and then I feel like you have many strings to your bow. They're all sort of around helping people and healing people. As you said, a lot of mental health work, a lot of maybe what you would consider spiritual work and stuff like that. Just talk about a little bit of sort of what has brought you over to that side.
I suppose, again, we're all driven by these unconscious parts, and like a lot of my drive in my 20s was like insecurity and lacking in confidence, and I always put, I never believed in myself. I was bullied a lot when I was young, and that kind of left this imprint of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. And I always told myself if I achieve things, I'll be enough, or if I meet this woman, I'll be enough, or if I buy a house, I'll be enough, and all this kind of stuff. So that drove a lot of my behavior, I guess, in my 20s, and like relentlessness, which can be useful up to a certain point. I think being pissed off at the world can be useful sometimes.
It's a powerful driving force, but when it's not ever happy, it's like a raging bull that won't stop running.
Yeah. What's this? Gabor Mate talks about feeding the hungry ghost, or you know, in the realm of hungry ghosts. So my 20s, when I failed with a business at 24, I was just lost. I just completely humiliated, a lot of shame, because I told everyone around me I'm going to start a fitness business, and everyone said, no, there's no industry for fitness in Ireland at this time, you know. And then I came back from that, and I built this business, bought a house, bought a car, met a great girlfriend, great friends and family, had it all, quote unquote. It's kind of a cliche story of like ticked all the boxes I wanted to tick. And at 28, I was more kind of lost and overwhelmed than I'd been, you know, ever, pretty much. I was in a different space. And it's like, it was the first time in my life where there was nothing I could point to and say, that's why I'm sad. I'm sad because I'm single. I'm sad because I'm broke. I'm sad because there was nothing like intellectually in my mind. Again, my conscious mind was like, I have everything I ever wanted. Like, why am I? And so I went to a psychologist, and, you know, I've shared this analogy for years. She said to me, you have a fire alarm in your house, and the purpose of the fire alarm is that when there's danger, your fire alarm goes off and says, there's danger here, get out of here. She says sometimes the fire alarm breaks and the toaster, you use the toaster or the oven, and now the fire alarm's going all the time. It's a pain. You pull it off the wall, pull out the batteries. And she said you also have a fire alarm within your system, like a stress response within your system, that when there's actual danger in your life, so a lion comes into the room, fire alarm goes off, you can fight or flight, you can run away. But she said sometimes that malfunctions for us and we get in these stress states where we can't get out of the fire alarm always going. So I had gotten to the point that I'd been running so fast in my 20s and living off caffeine and a lack of sleep and just being driven so hard. And just in that warrior zone of I'm going to get things done. Then my fire alarm my system was, I was overwhelmed. I was going into shutdown, going into burnout. And that prompted me to walk away from the fitness stuff. I gave the gym I had to my friend. I sort of, it was like eat, pray, love for boys. I went traveling and studying, and for a couple of years I moved into coaching, and that was interesting, like how the mind impacts us. And then I got to a point where I recognized the limitations of the mind. Again, like everything in your life can be good on paper, but sometimes you don't feel maybe that good. And that brought me more into the emotional space of like, okay, how do I understand what's going on emotionally? And in more recent years, it's kind of around like the relational space. So like, how does community impact us? Like I think initially psychology, with the word psychology was rooted in, the study of the soul. But
Psyche,
yeah, and modern psychology is very much around thinking, and they kind of, it's obviously got its place, but they've kind of fragmented things, I think, where it's all about thinking and maybe not taking into consideration your environment, your body, the link between your body and your mind, all these other things. So I'm just curious around that kind of holistic approach to like how we feel. I have a friend that says, if you take an animal and you put the animal in the zoo and the animal gets sick, it's not the animal's fault. They've been put in an unhealthy environment that's not natural for them. And of course they're going to be sick. Animals in nature don't get depressed, but put them in the zoo and sometimes they'll get depressed. And I think in many ways we're in unnatural environments, unnatural pace of life. So I guess that's my passion in recent years. And I started doing workshops years ago where it was goal setting and time management and the kind of more surface level stuff. And I guess it's just gone deeper over the years. And as I say, it's shifted more into men's work because there's a need for men to have a space to open and express, I think.
Yeah, and let's move into that now, because I think masculinity is an interesting topic, and I think maybe it's always been an interesting topic, but I feel like it's more at the forefront of the cultural discussion or the culture war even at the moment. I feel like you ask some people, masculinity is under attack. Now, I have my certain thoughts on that stuff, but I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on sort of the controversy about masculinity in general in the modern world.
I'd love to hear your thoughts first, if you're open to share.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel like the culture war between the left and the right, stemming from the States, that is kind of perpetuated throughout all of Western culture, is so incredibly divisive, where on one side you have extreme masculinity and the other side you have perhaps maybe just the loud individuals or the loud minority that, the toxic masculinity or masculinity is toxic. And I've spoken about this recently, I think maybe on even my podcast that I haven't released yet, but it might even be the episode that's going to come out before this one. So if I'm fucking playing the same tune. But I think that the first time, okay, well let's break it down a little bit. I'll ask you a question and then I'll answer it myself,
okay.
Which is, what do you think of when you first heard the term toxic masculinity?
I guess if I heard that a couple of years ago, I would think that men are bad, men are destructive, men are dangerous.
But I imagine you did, but when did you first, do you remember when you first heard that term? It's a relatively new term.
Yeah, you know what? I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to politics. Like, I have no clue what's going on in the world outside of, the work that I've... Yeah.
I spend too much time on Instagram, that's the problem.
I do or you do?
No, I do.
Oh, I probably do as well, man. I must be looking at thirst traps or something instead. No, I shouldn't say. That's toxic masculinity.
That's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, I think the general consensus around that would be men are dangerous, men are out of control, men are what's the word, patriarchal?
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And that was, I think that it's very difficult for any man to hear those words in combination, toxic masculinity, and not take it personally and assume that it was an attack on their gender. I don't think that that is the case. And I think that maybe that there are some people who do think, there are some women or men who would consider that to be what they mean, but it's not really what it means. Anything, the dose makes the poison, right? And I think that there can be toxic masculinity, and all that is talking about is maybe what you would refer to the shadow side of masculinity, which is the aspects of the masculine archetype that are negative, in the same way that you can have toxic femininity. And anyone who says that there's toxic masculinity but doesn't accept the fact that there can be toxic femininity is completely biased on one side, and they're not really talking fairly. So stuff like that, I believe that, and I guess that's where the discussion is. At what point does masculinity, or what aspects of masculinity are toxic and are detrimental not just to women but to men themselves? For example, the not being able to open up emotionally and things, whatever causes to, whatever leads to the massive asymmetry, the disproportionate amount of men killing themselves, or what would be called deaths of despair, so suicide, drug overdose, alcohol, stuff like that, which men suffer massively disproportionately. The only thing you can really say is that there's an aspect of masculinity that leads to men overdosing, killing themselves, and being alcoholics. No man could possibly consider that to be healthy, right? Yeah. So I think that for me, there are aspects of masculinity that are incredibly positive, and there's aspects that can be negative. And the discussion that we need to be having is not just being berated saying that men are bad, because I don't think anyone with any logic would ever really think that, but that there's parts of masculinity that can be detrimental.
Yeah. The way I would see this toxic masculinity piece in terms of, based on the work I would have done and kind of with myself and the work I share, is around, it's integration of shadow, as you say. So I mentioned earlier, we have these different parts. Are you familiar with the masculine archetypes, this idea?
Yeah. So, Robert Moore.
Yeah. So I think that's a really nice frame to use, and like using that as an example. So this idea that as a man, I'll have many different parts, but Robert Moore looked at king, warrior, magician, and lover. And for each of these, you've either got a healthy expression of the archetype. So the healthy king, which is like the man that goes out into the world and is of service and is grounded in himself and is non-reactive and has a sense of purpose and mission and stuff like that. That's your healthy king. But when you have not established a healthy king, you'll either go into too little king. So that's the weakling who abdicates and gives his power away, or you become the tyrant who tries to hold power over others, which is what we see a lot in politicians. I would judge a lot of the global politicians. So that's the king. The warrior is one we would see a lot. Is the warrior, the healthy warrior, goes out into the world, takes action, gets things done, sets boundaries, has a good connection to his anger. So anger is not bad. It's what we do with our anger that can be bad. So people that would say, like someone to express anger is toxic masculinity. I was like, no, it's not. Anger is what tells me, or it tells you, no, that's not okay with me. It sets in stone what's important. It's a boundary. The unhealthy warrior is either the pushover, like the nice guy. Oh, if I'm nice to women all the time and I give them exactly what they want, they'll respect me. And it's like, no, because that doesn't make a woman feel safe, because she knows she can walk all over you, and she knows that you're not going to have a backbone and actually speak your truth. And the other side of the unhealthy warrior is the man who shows too much warrior, which is the bully. And then you got the lover and the magician, which we can go into. But I guess the piece that I think is challenging is that as boys, most of us were told, don't feel. Implicitly or explicitly, like I always say, anger was the only emotion that felt safe for me to feel as a boy or a teenager, because you won't mess with me if I'm angry. If I hit you or I threaten you, I'm safe. But if I show joy, you'll probably tease me. If I show sadness or I cry, you'll probably tease me. If I show fear, you'll tease me. So anger is the only one that oftentimes, and anger relates to the warrior. So then as men, we find ourselves maybe comfortable in that warrior of going out into the world and making things happen, but we become disconnected from the lover, which is about feeling and connecting. So I think toxic masculinity is just, as you say, these shadow expressions of the different energies because we were told it's not safe to feel, you're not supposed to feel, men don't feel. And then you've got obviously the last couple of generations, the dynamic has shifted where women are much more empowered than they've been in the past, which forces men now to step up and kind of redefine what it is to be a man. Because what a man was 40 years ago is different to what a man is now. It was enough maybe back then to go out and be a breadwinner and to put food on the table, but that's not enough anymore. We've got to be integrated, which is why that map is nice. You know, a healthy man is again, healthy king, sense of vision and purpose in my life. I have a sense of where I'm going. I know who's within my kingdom. I know what matters to me. I know what my values are. I know what my mission here is. And these words can sound grandiose. Oh, my mission. Your mission could be to provide a nice life for your family and to put your kids through college. It could be to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu. It could be, your warrior then takes action on the things that your king values. So the warrior gets you to the jiu-jitsu gym, gets you to put money in the bank for your mortgage, whatever it might be. Your lover helps you enjoy the journey, you know, without having that kind of sensual part that enjoys the day-to-day. We're often stuck in our heads, which is a common thing for men. And then the magician is kind of the thinking part that takes a step back and looks around and say, okay, how are we going to approach these different things? So I like that map as a means of men understanding themselves a little bit more.
Yeah, there's a lot to break down there. One thing that came to mind is you were talking about how, because I think that in the world there has to be this symbiotic relationship between masculinity and femininity. I think in isolation, either of these things can be destructive. And so much has changed for women in the past 40 years, and not much has changed for men, which is why men find themselves perhaps in a new and difficult to navigate space in the world. And I read a book not long ago, which I really recommend, called Of Boys and Men, by a man called Richard Reeves. Have you heard of it?
No.
I recommend it.
Okay.
It talks about the issues. I feel like it's a balancing of the feminist movement without being anti-feminist. It talks about the issues that men have, that they're for example, obviously there's this big push to get women into STEM jobs, but then there's this huge asymmetry in what Richard refers to as heel jobs, like health, education, stuff like that. So then you have, the proportion of primary school teachers that are men, it's like 5-10%. It's tiny. So you get all of these kids being raised predominantly by women and not by men. And lots of other stuff, how there's advantages perhaps in the workplace for men, but there's actually a disadvantage. You have the pay gap, but you also have the education gap. Women do way better than men at school and university and things like that, and even proposing ideas such as men should start school a year later. So they should be a year younger, a year older than all of the women in their class, because that's about the same level. Women mature much faster because it's just part of their biology. You know, the success they have in school and all the way through university, since they've been able to get those opportunities, completely just lopsiding the balance there. So it's a very, very interesting book. And one of the main points he basically talks about is women have made these huge progressions and men are still stuck in the same place, not really knowing what to do. And there needs to be there needs to be activism for men and the men's movement in a positive way, in the same way that women have had that movement in the feminist movement in a positive way.
You know, this is something I saw recently. There's a lot of these podcasts in the States now that are like, I don't even know what you call it. You know, is red pill, blue pill, all this kind of
exactly. I mean, you didn't even have to say it. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's like there's young guys I know that I train jiu-jitsu with, and they're early 20s or whatever, and I watch them start to watch some of this content.
It scares me, man.
Yeah, within weeks, they're coming in and they're kind of rabbiting, or what's the word, parroting things that they've heard on the podcast, and women are this, and I'm like, wow. But I know myself, even if I watch a couple of hours of that stuff, it starts to skew you feed your biases, right? So like but I watched a lady recently, Sadia Khan. She's been on a couple of big podcasts. She's kind of a relationship psychologist with an interest in relationship. But she raised a good point. She said, if you consume any content and after consuming the content you hate women or you hate men based on it, you're not good content to be consuming. It sounds so basic, but
that's the problem with content. I mean, like, I talk about this a lot. I'm terrified of the world and the architecture of the world and the online space. And for those who are younger than myself and maybe less able to navigate that with logic and pragmatism, because, and one of this podcast that I'm going to put out prior to this one, or a few prior to this one, it very much is based on our evolutionary psychology and neurochemistry and stuff like that. Everything we do is based around stuff that we evolved to do over hundreds of thousands of years. So you imagine that you can scroll through Instagram Reels or TikTok, and of course the algorithm will push things heavily on you. So, and it doesn't matter whether you are watching it to be a fan of it or watching it to be angered by it. It will push it more against you. If you comment, never comment on something you don't want to see. Don't even look. If you don't want to see something, and I started doing this actually. You talked about the thirst traps. I started to be a bit sickened by how aggressively Instagram was pushing half-naked women on me. And this sounds weird, but I mean, we could get into a whole topic talking about pornography and stuff like that and how bad it is for you. But I just click onto the little option thing, and I want to see fewer of these posts on all of them. And within a couple of days, you won't get any. Yeah. So if you keep on getting infuriated by things you see online, don't comment hateful stuff on it. Oh, I'm sick of seeing this shit. Just click, I want to see fewer of these things. And that your algorithm will change almost instantly. But anyway, you scroll through a TikTok, you scroll through Instagram, and if you scroll for 1 hour, and that's not a long time, people scroll for 3-4 hours at a time. It's designed to hack our psychology to make us doom scroll, continually scroll. And if you imagine in an hour, Instagram or TikTok video can be 15, 20 seconds, 10 seconds long to get a message across. How many hundreds of people you hear in perpetuating the same message? Now imagine that we didn't have the internet. How many of your community would have to be thinking the same thing for you to hear 100 people perpetuate one idea? Imagine that we don't have phones, we don't have internet, we don't have anything like that. All the content that we see is people that we speak to in our life, which is all our psychology is built to understand, right? Imagine you talk to 100 people and all of them say women they're getting out of hand and we've got to put them back in their place. And you go, oh, okay, so I haven't heard that before. And then the next person you see goes, women are getting out of hand, we need to put them back in our place. And okay, and then the next person you see says, we need to be more dominant over women, we've got to put them in their place. And you see that to 100 people, you're going to be like, fuck, this must be the case. Every single person I'm talking to is saying the same thing. But that could just be 1 hour of scrolling on Instagram. You know, and how powerful that can be and how much that can, and I can feel it sometimes. I'll scroll and I'll watch 10 videos in a row that have similar ideas, red pill, you know, the anti-woman sort of stuff. And you feel this thing inside of you start to go, oh, maybe they're onto something. You've got to pull back a little bit and go, wait, I'm being brainwashed. And that is what terrifies me about the internet and about kids in their teens who don't have the emotional maturity or understanding yet to be able to differentiate between what is reality and what is essentially brainwashing.
I don't know if this ties directly, but I was recently looking at this piece around, like, our minds obviously want to make sense of our experiences of life, and so they'll just, you know, pick experiences and give them meanings and like slot them into neat little boxes and be quite polarized. And it was talking about, say you're going through a breakup, or you're going through a fallout with a friend, or you've been challenged by someone, or there's opposition in your life in some capacity. Generally, we take either the villain or the victim side of things. And the villain is the person who has a lot of shame. Oh, I did them wrong. I messed things up. And if I kind of make myself the bad guy in the situation. The victim is the person who feels they've been harmed. And so they get angry. And so I'm thinking about a lot of this content where men are made out to be the victim. Women are doing this to us. Women are doing this. It's putting young men in that, particularly young men, in that position of I'm a victim in life. And now there's all this anger being projected in unhealthy ways.
Got to fight back.
Yeah. In like these shadowy, shitty ways, rather than and actually saying, okay, how can I like improve myself and be comfortable in my own skin? But those two things, villain and victim, right, again, really polarized. What if neither were true? What if there was some truth in the middle? What if both were, and that's the biggest challenge, I think, personally and collectively, right? Like
100%.
We can be very black and white in our own thinking of ourselves. I'm a good guy or I'm a bad guy. No, I'm a guy that makes mistakes and also does great things in the world. He's a good guy or a bad guy. I did a bunch of weird courses in recent times. But actually, there's probably stuff from this weekend's course that I was on that I can share as well. But a couple of years ago, I was on a course. It was kind of a communication piece. And obviously, we see the world through our own eyes and our own experiences and our own history. And so we're sat opposite each other here at a table. What you're viewing is different to what I'm viewing in the room. Neither of us are wrong. We're just having different lenses. And so an exercise they shared that was quite cool, actually, was you'd sit with a partner and you'd have 3 minutes to talk about something you were passionate about. So I talked about jiu-jitsu, I think. And then they said, okay, now I want you to step into the shoes of someone who's completely against this thing that you're passionate about and argue from their point of view. So I'm like, it's violent, it's this, it's beside, I just went off. And you don't come out of the opposition kind of thing thinking, oh, I hate jiu-jitsu, but you're like, oh, I can kind of understand people a little bit more that maybe aren't into this. Maybe
that's a first.
Yeah, sorry, you said.
Yeah, that capacity. I fear for the world a little bit a lot as well, because things are so fast. We're not maybe getting that space. We talked about journaling earlier. Journaling is an amazing practice if people can find the time to challenge these thoughts or these assumptions or these. Yeah,
and I mean, it's very easy to complain and say the world's scary and Instagram's bad or the content, short form content is harmful, because but it's easy to say that you're not bringing much value if you're not finding a way to trying to help people navigate that. And I don't really know what the answer is, but you're absolutely right. I think what we lose with short form content, especially, which is why I prefer to do long form podcasts, is you lose the thing that is essential in life, which is nuance. Like nothing's black and white, nothing's simple. The reality is that you have 2 points of view. It almost always, the reality sits in the middle of it. But that's not what gets engagement online.
And that's all they care about. Have you read Stolen Focus?
Yeah, Johan Hari,
yeah. So like that idea, which is it's same idea with the Social Dilemma documentary and stuff like that, which is it's hacking human psychology to just get more engagement. They want you on there the whole time, and it frustrates me a little bit when Zuckerberg talks about his whole thing is about connecting people. Like it's and maybe that was true to begin with, and maybe along the way he's lost. He's found himself trapped by shareholders in Meta, and now he can't do that. But the world has never been more divided, and it is almost wholly because of social media.
I saw this thing. I thought it was interesting a couple of years ago, and maybe I'll get this. Maybe I won't share the first part because it might upset people. But it said that when you look at social media, you look at all the different platforms. Every one of the platforms were created by white, reclusive, kind of nerdy.
Yeah.
I don't know if they said on the spectrum, but like guys that liked to be behind closed doors, hiding behind a screen, didn't like socializing, and we sort of all bought into that. We're like, oh, this is how we interact now. And ironically, a lot of those type of people maybe don't use the same platforms anymore. They use other, I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting...
It's like Steve Jobs not giving his kids iPads.
Yeah. And also, like, I've heard... Like,
don't get high on your own supply.
yeah. Well, I think, same with Zuckerberg. I think he so I saw something recently. They were saying, does he blank out this kids' faces when they're on social media, even though they're a bit older now and stuff? But I guess maybe a challenge, like you saw this during the pandemic, where Bill Gates was kind of seen as... Like I'm not polarized in my views of Bill Gates. I don't know anything about him really, but I do think it's a scary thing that just because these guys are technologically minded and they're very clever people, that we're ignorant enough to think that technology can fix everything or that we can outsmart nature. I think that's a scary thing. like as we talked about earlier, we need community, we need safe spaces to come together, we need to be in tribe in different ways. You can try to come up with technological solutions to all those things, but I mean, I think Johann Hari's first book, he talked about that we can make the false connection of, okay, porn equals intimacy, but we're not actually getting what we get when we have sex with someone or we make love to someone, or social media is giving me connection. You're not ever fulfilling on the actual need. Like again, I don't know if this ties in all these open loops, but someone shared with me recently that when we're children, we have wants and we have needs. So I need love, I need care, I need attention. Maybe I want a PlayStation. I want a Man United jersey. If our parents don't give us what we need, and maybe they just give us what we want, there's a part of us that's not nourished by that. Like we're not having a healthy experience. We don't build our self-esteem because my parents just buy me the stuff, but they don't give me what I need. And we can also make that same mistake with ourselves as adults, particularly if we didn't have our needs met. So if there wasn't someone in our younger years that listened to us, that gave us space to express our feelings, that allowed us to be ourselves, that allowed us to have a voice at the table, if those needs were not met, sometimes as adults, we have a hard time allowing ourselves to meet those needs for ourselves. Or we go to our wants. And I think similar, okay, I want to watch porn, but is it fulfilling on the need? What is the need? The need is to feel some sense of connection or some sense of intimacy. It's not actually ticking the box. So again, that's what addiction is effectively, is like never getting enough of something you don't need.
Yeah, that it's the dopamine, right? Like dopamine is the hormone that makes you go for something.
Yeah.
It's not about when you get it. It's that, scrolling the next thing or finding the next thing. We have this overabundance of it.
And maybe just coming back, I mentioned earlier that, these young guys and they get angry when they watch these podcasts and stuff. To own my side of again, not to be saying, no, people are doing wrong things. I always think, if I see issues out in the world, if thirst traps is an issue, if politicians being corrupt is an issue, it's not always easy, but I always see whatever's going on out there is going on within me also on some level. So, if I see men being dominant over women and mistreating women, it's easy for me to point the finger and distract myself from the ways that I do that or have done that in the past. So I do try to look out there and say, okay, well, this black and white thinking is a big issue in the world. But how do I take that home and actually integrate that in my own life? I think gives me back some level of ownership and responsibility. Because I don't want to be projecting all my stuff outward. It's the stuff that triggers me. Again, it's kind of Jungian psychology, but the stuff that irritates me or triggers me, there's things that inform you. If someone shows up late for lunch, you're informed by that. But there's also things that disturb us. It's the stuff that disturbs us that is actually, so my friend turns up late and I'm really irked by that. Maybe there's something in that for me. Maybe that's, okay, I need to start speaking up for myself. Or maybe there's areas in my life where I show up late. So I think it's interesting to see, what am I disturbed by in life? And what is that teaching me about myself?
No, that's interesting. And the other thing that got me thinking when you were talking about the archetypal stuff, obviously you have the shadows of the archetypes and also the uninitiated or the man-child. And that's a big thing in all of the masculinity reading that I've done. That's something that it seems that we're missing the most in society, which is throughout all indigenous cultures that are still around. And when you look at stuff in the past, there was always a rite of passage or an initiation between boyhood and manhood. And that is an incredibly important thing for us on a deep level that we get none of basically in modern society. And that's causing issues.
Yeah. Sorry. There's a couple of things that I kind of take from the initiation piece. One is modern day, I was driving over to jiu-jitsu at home the other day, and there's 40 teenagers out in the street just beating the crap out of each other, turf wars and little drug gangs in the area. There's a part of me is oh, little scumbags, or I like that kind of thing. But then it's no, this is the problem with not having the village anymore. This is the disconnect. And so the first part that I think is interesting with the initiation piece is that traditionally when the village would see that kind of behavior or an energy changing, it wasn't kind of oh, he's hormonal, or oh, he's troublemaker or stuff like that.
It's time.
yeah, there's a recognition. Oh, there's energy in this boy. Like he's got anger, he's got all this, and so we need to channel this anger. It's interesting because sometimes the youth have all this energy and have this like all this emotion and all this kind of possibility, and like I say, when I was 18 and I go to America thinking I could be a cage fighter with no experience, you know, I've got that. You have that ignorance and ambition and all that as a teenager or as a young man. And then obviously the elders, like the older people in the community, have hopefully got some wisdom, some lived experience, the possibility. And so in theory, that should be a beautiful collaboration of the old, and this is what we see in martial arts gyms. I suppose the older man is a mentor to the younger man and helps to channel, because the youthful energy that's wild and free needs to be contained in some capacity, you know, and that's what the mentor can allow. So that's the first piece with initiation, is like, and we can take this into our own lives. It's not just one initiation from boy to man. There's many initiations. Like if you've never been in a long-term relationship and you go into a long-term relationship, that's an initiation in a way, because what happens in an initiation is who you were starts to die and you have to become somebody new. So in the village, they were saying, okay, well, you're a boy now, but if you don't grow into a man, we're going to have a village ran by boys, and that's not good for anyone. And so they'd be put through a huge ordeal. And the couple of elements, one was they're pulled away from the mother. So you're pulled away from the safety and the comfort that has soothed you, and you're going to learn how to be with your difficulties. And this might sound odd for people, but in the modern day, a lot of men have replaced their mother with porn or with junk food or with gambling or with different addictive behaviors that soothe them when they don't feel comfortable, because we didn't ever learn how to be with our difficult emotions. And then I love the idea that when you come back from an initiation, you're given a new name, because you're a man now. So you want to be reminded in every moment that you're a man.
And I've heard stuff about with the mother, because I think that's that is the whole point, I guess, of the initiation, is the removal of everything up to this point, the care of the mother, the removal from that, and then coming back as a different person. They'd say with a lot of these tribes, they would the women would know that they're going to take them, you know, that the boy's going to be taken for this ritual, and they would, even though they're totally on board with it, they would scream and they'd cry and they'd act like this kid is being like kidnapped, you know, and completely unwanted, even though that's all an act. And in the same way, when they return, very often the mother would pretend not to recognize the boy. That they'd look at them and they wouldn't go and run and hug them and, oh, you're back. It would be like, oh, who are you? Like they're meeting a new person.
And something I think is nice, that again, it's probably taking these elements and thinking like, how do we apply them? Because we're never going back to the village. But I love the idea that back in the day, if there's 100 people in the village, everybody within the context of the village has got a role. So you've got the baker, you've got the jiu-jitsu coach, you've got the podcaster, you've got the nurse, you've got the doctor. Everyone's got a role. So everyone's got a purpose, and no one's purpose is more important than anyone else's purpose, because you're a community, and so everyone's got to contribute. And so if someone dies, then everyone's lost something. But the idea of the initiation was, the initiation is not for you, it's for the village. So it's beyond yourself, which again, we were talking about that with the public speaking earlier. We can put all the attention on ourselves, but there was a recognition there that, no, you're becoming a man because the village needs a man, not because you need, you know, it's not for you, it's for something bigger than you, which is probably an important piece of it as well, because we're in an individualistic society here where it's about getting ahead. And as I say, in my 20s, I got ahead, but I wasn't happy because I wasn't of service anymore. So yeah, there's ways. I mean, you can recreate these initiations in different ways, but obviously, like, it's interesting. Sometimes when I talk to martial arts guys, they don't understand the personal development. They're like, I don't get why you have to do that, because I think they get a lot of that through the journey of martial arts, and they don't ever need to do any. Not that they don't need to do any of this work, but you learn so much. You've got mentorship, you've got brotherhood, you've got competition if you want to compete, you've got having to get your ass kicked and come back and humble yourself time and time again. There's a huge amount in it.
But it's there, and it's tickling the subconscious need for those things. But the context, because I've been that person who felt like I didn't need anything else because jiu-jitsu gave me everything that I needed. And as I've got older, I've got more, I've thought more that actually, no, there needs to be more context, and there needs to be more framework, and there needs to be more ritual to jiu-jitsu. And I think that's something that tradition and ritual is something that seems so antiquated and pointless when you're young, I feel. I hated anything that was only being done because it was tradition. I found tradition to be the most, I think as jiu-jitsu people, we find tradition naturally repulsive because it's sort of the antithesis. Jiu-jitsu, wrestling, judo,
Sambo.
Sambo, boxing, these are all fighting arts. These are modern things that work. And the antithesis of those are what we call the traditional martial arts. Karate and Aikido, and these are things that don't work. These are old. This is the past. And so we have already, as a jiu-jitsu or as a grappler, we have this repulsion to the word traditional. And then just naturally, I think it's like traditional is pointless. Everything we do should have a point. And I think a lot of people don't realize that tradition is there for a reason, and that ritual gives us a framework. And, I've thought over the last few years about how I would try to integrate more of a contextual framework and ritual into my jiu-jitsu teaching. Like when you give a belt, I think I would always think, I'd go, okay, I'm black belt for him, and you go and hand him a black. And that's all we need, because that's how jiu-jitsu do it. But then I've thought about the one that I like actually was, I think SBG do it, which is the Iron Man.
Yeah.
For the black belt. You roll for an hour straight.
They do them for all their belts.
They do them for all of them. And I think they get longer as they go through the belts. And this idea of, the death and rebirth ritual, be it through rites of passage, manhood initiations, or Eleusinian mysteries, or like whatever it is, like this idea of dying and coming back as a different person. And Gandalf the Grey dies and he comes back as Gandalf the White, and so much more powerful. And I love the idea of someone in an Iron Man for their black belt being broken down, stripped down so there's nothing but jiu-jitsu left, and then being raised back up a new person with a new belt. And I think that adding more of these into our everyday life, but for me, like, it's jiu-jitsu because that is life for me. It can give more context and maybe be more fulfilling to those subconscious needs that we have.
We, as I told you, I've been on this course for the last couple of days, and it's been around masculine and feminine dynamics. And part of it's that within us, there's, again, people are triggered by the language sometimes, but there's a masculine within me and there's a feminine within me. And similar for females, there's both within. And the idea is that masculine is kind of about like structure and grounding, and like a mountain, like solid, in despite everything going on around it. Like I can hold whatever's happening, like that capacity to hold chaos. And then the feminine is more the chaos, like the flow and the unpredictability and the big emotions and stuff like that. So we were doing all these practices throughout the weekend to embody, like to really feel how it is. So we're doing like deep meditative practices and really feel your energy sinking into the ground, and really, really getting a felt sense of what that's like in the body. And then equally doing more emotional stuff for your tuning. But what was amazing with the weekend, that it was a lot of ritual, like you're talking about, and a lot of kind of intentionality. But for me, it was an initiation of sorts, because the big piece for me was about blending the energies of, I want to be. I get a lot of feedback that I'm calm and I'm grounded, which is nice, and that's how I would like to be. But I recognize that oftentimes I don't express then my anger, or not even anger, but like I don't take what I want sometimes in life. I'm just kind of a little bit passive, maybe. A little bit too nice, maybe. And so they would have us step into the role of like, okay, really feel how it is to be grounded, to be solid. Now really tune into the wild man. So we were doing this practice, and we're sat opposite someone, and we're breathing, like Wim Hof kind of breathing, going really deep, but you're looking in someone's eyes, and they're kind of, heavy music's going, and they're saying, look in your partner's eyes and keep your man sharp, don't let him drop. And like the more intense your partners get. And then they said, now feel your wildness, and you're really like feeling this as you breathe in. And I started crying out of nowhere, and I was like, and it was around recognizing a lot what we're talking about there, the doom scrolling and fucking spending my life looking at a screen and all this, and like losing the wildness, like, and I think we're supposed to be out there living, and it's, for me at least, I fall into the trap of, all these things that I see as problems in the world definitely show up in my world of, it's a lot of what we were touching on. I think this like not having in-person connection with people, not being in my body enough and using my body enough. I'm going to have to buy you a grip training. There's a little plug. But yeah, it was an interesting experience, breathing deeply and just having that recognition of, I've become a bit more domesticated than I'd like to be.
Have you read Iron John?
Yeah.
So obviously that's all about
the wild man.
Yeah. It's sort of I think Robert Bly has the 5 archetypes: the king, warrior, magician, lover, and the wild man.
Yeah.
Or maybe the trickster's in there as well, I think.
Well, they were like, when we were doing this breathing yesterday, they're saying, get into your wild man, feel it in your eyes, and you're looking at someone, your eyes are getting big and leery, and they're mirroring it back to you, so it feels. But then they kept giving this prompt. They're like, tune into the part of you that doesn't give a fuck. And I love that. I was like, I need to live from that place more. It was just... It was interesting because, again, all this noise can numb us or dumb us down to the conformity of the group, I suppose.
Yeah. And something that you've said a couple of times about in-person community, I think that is one of the biggest advantages of jiu-jitsu, and something that we lose more and more as everything becomes more online. I think, for me, jiu-jitsu is the greatest... Obviously, me being super biased as always with it. But I think in terms of building, and obviously it's great to see women becoming more and more women coming into the jiu-jitsu space. But especially for men, to get together with other men and not just be together in person, but to be able to unleash a little bit of I feel like there's very few things where you can unleash the wild man energy in a controlled environment against other people who have consented to that and are happy to do it, and that's kind of part of the fun. I feel like jiu-jitsu builds that community in a way that very few other sports. I mean, judo, wrestling, maybe some of the striking arts. I don't like striking arts because you're punching people in the head, and it just kind of I think you're just dumbing people up a little bit. But I'm sure that there's a little bit more of it. But there's something much more visceral, I think, and primitive with the wrestling, all of those wrestling and grappling arts, that is especially good for the masculine energies.
Yeah, if you come back to that thing of wants and needs, I might want a Rolex or want a fancy car, want all those things, but really what I need at my core, I need physical contact, I need exercise, I need to breathe deeply, I need to process my emotions, I need a sense of safety, I need a sense of, all these needs are being met in one way. And then on the flip side of the coin, a lot of, I work with people in addiction oftentimes. I had a guy years ago who was a gambling addict, and when we kind of peel back the layers, everything you do in life is giving you something, even if you think it's taking everything from you. So I asked, what is gambling giving you? He said, no, it's taking everything. It's taking my family. It's taking... And when we peeled it back down, what it was giving him was a sense of community, because he had no friends outside of the bookies. So it's like... I said, it makes complete sense that you gamble if your only social circle is in the bookies.
It's like gangs, right?
Yeah.
Why do kids get brought? Why do kids find their place, and why do they become gang affiliated? And because a lot of them who have had no father figure growing up and have no sense of community see strong, powerful males, and they latch onto that, and that becomes their tribe. And I think that's why martial arts are so important, because if you can grab those kids a bit earlier and you can put them in, they can feel like they have a place.
Yeah, Tony Robbins talks about the 6 human needs. Did you ever come across that?
No.
Briefly, he'll say we have these needs and they drive all of our behaviors. So the first need would be the need for certainty. So I need some level of predictability in my life. So I can meet that in a healthy way. I go to the gym every day and I have a sense of certainty. I can meet in less healthy ways. So I smoke cigarettes and I'm kind of certain of how I'll feel. So we have this need for certainty. We have a need for uncertainty, which is like variety, unpredictability, or life will be boring. So some people meet the need for uncertainty by going to watch a movie they've never seen before. Some people do it by injecting themselves with heroin. It could be any number of things. The third need is significance, which is the one that comes to mind here. We all want to feel significant. I can meet it in a positive way. Maybe I work toward a blue belt and I get my blue belt and I feel significant. But Tony Robbins talks about how the fastest way potentially to feel significant is to hold a gun to someone's head. And so the teenage boy who's completely lost has this need to feel significant. That's a fast way of doing it. And then briefly he talks about the love. We have a need for love, of course, and if we're afraid of love, we'll settle for connection. So I'm not quite sure how he deciphers the two. But the interesting piece in the human needs, the most maybe tangible bit, is he says we've got these 4 human needs, and then you've got the 2 spiritual needs, and the 2 spiritual needs are growth and contribution. So his thing is everything in nature grows and it contributes to the bigger ecosystem. And so he says you can have all the money in the world, you can have all the achievements in the world, but if you're not growing and giving back in some capacity, you'll feel unfulfilled. So I think it's a useful framework in ways.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, I guess kind of continuing on with this, you mentioned that a lot of your work is working with men and doing men's groups and stuff like that. We've spoken a lot about our thoughts on men and masculinity. What is the context in which you work with men, and how have you found to work for you?
It was funny, years ago I was doing the personal development stuff, and most of my audience had come from the fitness space, and they were mostly female. So I started doing the talks and seminars, and the whole room's women, and there'd be 1 or 2 guys in the room, and I'd always say, raise your hand if your partner dragged you along. The guys were always dragged along. But then slowly but surely the room started to shift to being kind of 50-50, and then I said I'm going to just solely do men's stuff. The context, if we work with the archetypes, like one of the ways we might run an event is like the lover is all about feeling. So the start of an event might be that we spend a couple of minutes each just checking in with how we feel. There's different ways of doing that. One way is, we call it a pies check-in. Pies is physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. So you'd kind of check in physically, I'm feeling this. Intellectually, I'm feeling this. Emotionally, I feel a bit sad. Spiritually, I feel quite connected. And each man gets a chance just to kind of share. And that's a huge challenge for guys that have never done that before to express. An interesting piece with that is a lot of guys will have a hard time saying what they feel. They'll say what they think. I feel like. Anytime someone says I feel like, they're going to a judgment rather than an actual feeling. But over time I start to notice guys saying, oh, I'm feeling joy today. I spent time with my kids yesterday, or I'm feeling anger. Nothing I do for my partner ever seems to be enough, or I'm feeling fear. I've got an interview for a job tomorrow. So the purpose of that is developing a bit of an emotional literacy over time. Because I always say, if you don't know what you feel, you can't know what you need. So as we start to understand our feelings, we can notice our feelings, or notice our needs. So we start with that kind of lover piece, a chance for everyone to check in. We do a little meditation maybe to get settled and just kind of create a ritual around it. As you say, it's kind of like, okay, let's leave the outside world outside and let's be together for 2 hours. Then we move into warrior sometimes, and warrior is kind of developing that capacity to be clear and to be direct. And sometimes that involves if there's issues within the group. So if you've done something that's upset me, someone might facilitate a little process between the 2 of us to clear that energy. Because oftentimes people we're pissed off with actually represent someone else in our lives. Like if I'm pissed off with figures in authority, if I hate the police, maybe it's actually to do with my father because he was an authoritarian, or whatever it might be. Oftentimes we're transferring. So doing that work in the warrior round and clearing any tension within the group is important, just to learn to, it's okay to give feedback to other men and to kind of share what's hurtful to you or what's not feeling good for you. And then we'll do a little bit of magician work, which could be helping guys to, coaching them through challenges they're having, or like helping them identify patterns that are not helpful. And then at the end we'll do a king's round, and the king is about king is about blessing other men. So I might say I bless you and your courage tonight to share what you shared, or I bless you. It's just a chance to how I think one of the biggest issues in the world is the lack of men celebrating other men, because we're raised from the time we're boys to be competitive. Women connect more and they talk about the boy that they like or whatever from a young age, whereas guys, we're playing a lot of sport maybe or stuff like that, and it's all about winning and getting ahead, and that transfers into latter life. And there's this idea of the father wound, and oftentimes, my father was a great man, and he always would find the flaw because he came up in a different generation, so he'd always find where I was falling short or where I could do more, and there was always kind of that narrative. And I think oftentimes we internalize the critical voices that we heard in our youth, so you'll find the inner critic character that you have has probably got the energy of someone from your past who told you those things: you're not enough, you're not doing enough, you're never going to be enough, whatever it might be. And so I mentioned it earlier, the youthful energetic, anything's possible teenager, that energy not being celebrated or harnessed kills that energy over time. And you can see it from a guy going from 16, 17 up to maybe mid-20s. He starts to become numb and dead to the world, and everything's about pints and money, or, you know, whatever, chasing girls, and he loses his connection to his purpose. So I think the celebration of other men is really important. There's something that happens, for me at least, and again, we see everything's back to martial arts. We see it when your martial arts instructor who's 30 or 40 years older than you pulls you aside and says, you're getting really good at this. That lights something up inside of you that you didn't even know needed lighting up. Because I think most of us didn't get it at home. Not through any fault of our fathers, but our fathers didn't get it from their fathers.
Down, right?
Yeah. So the blessing from other men it's huge. And it also speaks to, like, if I'm in a good place within myself, if I have a strong sense of this is who I am in the world, this is what I'm doing, this is what's important to me, life's not a competition anymore. Life becomes a competition when I'm disconnected from myself, because now I'm looking around me and, oh, Dan seems to have his stuff together, so I'm going to pull him down. Or he seems to have his stuff together, so I'm going to put him on a pedestal. And that's that unhealthy thing where it's I look down on people or I look up to people. Both are not healthy. It's about looking side by side with, you're just another man on your journey, figuring it out, doing your best. I'm a man on my journey, figuring it out, doing my best. Yeah, I think it's getting away from that competitive nature and like being collaborative and being, you know, celebrating each other really is the big piece.
And this work, which I guess you would describe as spiritual, or maybe some people would describe it maybe as shadow work on yourself to kind of discover these things and understand these things. The majority of people will never ever do this. I think it's hard work, right? It's a lot. You when you open yourself up to kind of clear out the crap that's inside, you got to see the crap first, and that can be difficult. What are some ways that, I mean, is this something that everyone should try to do? Because I'm sure there'll be plenty of people listening to this that are like, have maybe not been exposed to any of these ideas or concepts ever before. And maybe, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who have zero interest in trying to work it out. Maybe it's just not for them. If I had listened to this podcast when I was 23, I would have completely poo-pooed the whole thing, honestly. But now me too. You know, that's the reality. I was a very different person in my early 20s. But this is the stuff that I was actually the most excited to talk to you about. Is this something that everyone should do? And if so, what is like the first steps to doing it? Is it going to finding someone who already knows what it is, going to a retreat? Is it reading this book, or is it reading King Warrior Magician Lover? Is that like, I mean, that was one of the first things that I did that kind of opened my eyes up to these concepts. And I know that a lot of people who work with masculinity, that is the basis of what they do. So like, what is the first toe in the water for this sort of work?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think I've had people message me over the years and say, you know, I'm thinking about coaching with you, sell it to me. Like, why should I coach with you? I'm like, don't, like, get it. You don't need to come and coach with me. You know, if you got a reason to come and do it. If you don't, it's all good. Like, there's no, I think some people come to it and it's like really interesting to them, and like, I almost wish like I wasn't as into it as I am. You know, I'm just down that rabbit hole now, and it's interesting to me, and I have to pull myself out of it every now and then and be like,
I feel the same.
Yeah. Sometimes you can spend your life analyzing your life, or I can spend my life. If people are interested, you know, Wim Hof breathwork has become a big thing over the last couple of years, and similar to jiu-jitsu, I think it's because it ticks certain boxes. I think something like a Wim Hof practice is a really nice personal practice to start with, because a lot of this work is about slowing down effectively the busy mind, like that plays the same stuff on a loop. So if I get up in the morning and I just listen to my thoughts, generally, I think they say 95% of today's thoughts will be just the same as yesterday. We just replay the same narratives for years, maybe at a time. My partner is X, and I just play that out again and again. So I see my partner the same way every day. So something like Wim Hof, for most guys, I think most people in general, when I try to meditate, my mind feels busier than it's ever been before. And I'm like, oh, I'm not good at this. Forgetting it's a practice like anything else. But the Wim Hof is a very fast access point for people to clear in the mind. So that could be a nice starting point, just as a way of quietening your mind a little bit and just seeing what comes up, because oftentimes very clear stuff comes up for people when they do something like that, as in like one thing they need to focus on, or one change they need to make. I think that's a nice practice. We talked a lot about community today. I mean, if you look for a men's circle, if you can find a nice men's circle, that's a really good option. And a men's circle is kind of what I described there. You meet maybe once a fortnight, you sit for 2 hours, you do a bit of breathing, you do a bit of, and again, all this stuff sounds basic, but I would say to anyone, like, if this in any way speaks to you, like, just give it a go and lean in and have a look. King Warrior Magician Lover is a book. It's somewhat heavy lifting, I think, for some guys. I have a friend, Rod.
It's short though.
It is short, yeah.
I've got the four individual ones on each archetype. They're big.
I got them as well, man. They were expensive. Did you?
I know. I know. One of them, they're super expensive. They're very expensive. Yeah. And I got the final one, the Lover one, which was the hardest one to find. Yeah. And then it arrived without the dust cover, and I'm like, no, gutted.
I think they £250 per book or something silly.
I managed to get them all for very good prices.
Okay.
Yeah, I know where to look.
I have a friend, Rod Boothroyd, who's based in the UK, and he has a book. It's very similar title. I think it's Lover, Warrior, Magician. It's just different. Modern update. That's a nice book for just helping people understand. I would suggest that book. I'd suggest maybe Wim Hof breathing practice, and find a men's group if you can find a men's group. There's so many directions you could go, but I guess, sorry, one other thing that just I've been thinking about recently is, and again, all these things are things I'm trying to focus on myself, but there can be a tendency to want to add more, and say, like, if I'm working with a coaching client who's overwhelmed in the corporate space, naively a couple of years ago, I'd go in and I'd say, oh, you can do this meditation practice and do this and do this. And you're kind of adding to an already full bucket. So half the work is actually taking out some of the junk that's there. So that might be something for people to consider, is like, where am I spending my time now? Okay, I'm 4 hours a day on social media. Can I cut that back to 2 and see what I could do with those 2 hours? That might be as powerful a work for a man who wants to understand himself more. Effectively, all this work for me is about, I have a friend who says that, how does he describe it? Moving from a conditioned life to a creative life, or something like that. So you're effectively just recognizing that we're all playing out scripts. My script for a long, long time was, I'm bullied, I'm an outsider, I don't fit in, because that was my experience as a youth. For others, they're living out a script. We're all living within a story. So it's interesting to figure out what your story is. Some people's story is, I'm incredible at everything I do, but most people's story is, I'll never be enough. I'm not lovable. Nothing I do is ever good enough for my partner, whatever it might be. So it's interesting to just get to know those stories and then challenge them a little bit.
And just on because you mentioned the men's circle thing, is there does it matter does it matter the men's circle? Is it just like, if you have a group of men that are talking about something, that are talking and that are purposely, intentionally getting together to share sort of and discuss things, is that kind of enough? Or because I kind of think, like, are there bad men's circles? They're ones that kind of maybe go and can open some doors and not do it with care, and actually can be a bit more destructive, or is it pretty much safe?
There's actually a great book called, it's either called A Journey of Men or A Gathering of Men by Bill Cowth. And that book is specifically on how to run a men's circle with no experience. And it gives you the first 8 weeks. It gives you the full structure. Here's the games to play, communication exercises to do. Here's to set up the space. Here's how to create ritual. Wow. That's a really good book. I'll send you the reference for that, so you can add it to the show notes or whatever. Maybe myself and yourself could look to do like a jiu-jitsu circle in London.
I'd be really interested,
It'd be cool to do a one-off and just see. And maybe just alongside that, look, I'm talking about all these things, which I know will be a stretch for people that are not in this world. Again, back to basics, going for a hike with a few male friends and not having your phones in your hand. Could be in Ireland, I don't know if you have it in the UK, we've got the men's sheds. And the men's sheds,
I'm aware of.
It's a nice idea. They've got them in a bunch of villages around the country, and it's for men that are retired or maybe widowed, or just getting a bit older in life. And they have these men's sheds where men go, I don't know, a couple of times a week, and they do woodwork, or they do so they're doing work, but the purpose of doing the work is to connect them, and it saves lives. And I think, you know, a lot of psychologists have talked about that men are better when they're shoulder to shoulder, as opposed to sat opposite each other, as we sit opposite each other here. But, you know, we give men something to do. So going for a hike, these things, even within your jiu-jitsu community, you know, can you pick some? That came to me actually yesterday. I was thinking when I was doing the breath work and stuff here on this course yesterday, I thought, I think I might try and set up a day within the school where I train, just to be interesting, you know, like you train alongside these guys 4 or 5 times a week, maybe for years at a time, and how often do we know what's actually going on behind, as close as we might be sometimes. This is something I learned during the pandemic. I ran a men's group for 2 years, once a week online. I think it was about 30 of us, and in the 2 years, a couple of guys lost their fathers, a couple of guys became fathers, a couple of guys ended relationships, a couple of guys started relationships, a couple of guys got really sick. 1 or 2 guys found out they had autism, ADHD, things they hadn't realized they had. There was so much within a group of 20 or 30 guys that there's like, if they didn't have that space once, and myself, all that I had going on, if I didn't have that space for 2 years to share what was going on for me, that's a lot of holding, and that's 30 guys, and then you take it out across the UK and you're like, that's 30 million guys or whatever it is. It's a lot of, so yeah, how do we create these spaces to... And it can start small. You don't need to be going into people's childhood wounds and all this kind of stuff. It's just having conversations. What's going on for you? You know, what are you challenged by? One of the things, look, we could talk all day. I think we should look to set something up potentially as a one-off.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
One of the challenges for men is we try to, you know, if a friend shares with us something they're struggling with, we go straight to, well, you should do this or you could do that. We go straight to fixing or trying to solve, because that's our kind of default setting, because we're not comfortable with the emotion that comes up. So my friend talks about how sad they are because they're going through a breakup, and it's hard to be with the sadness because maybe we haven't dealt with our own sadness. So we say, oh, well, you should join Tinder. It's like, no, just like try to say, that must be hard.
I saw this thing, which I found very useful in dealing with everyone, really. But it's especially in the context of dealing with women, where men have a natural... Their instinct is to try and fix. I think that's maybe the warrior in them, right? Yeah. The instinct is, I have this problem, and we go, how are we going to have that? You know, how are we going to find a solution? But a small exercise you can do, especially with a partner, if you know, your partner, your spouse comes to you with a problem, you just say, do you want comfort or solutions?
Nice.
And then that's up to them. I just want comfort. Okay, you know, this happened at work. I'm like, that sucks. That must be absolutely shit. And they're like, yeah, it is shit. Yeah. Or this happened at work, and do you want comfort or solutions? I want solutions. Okay, well, let's find out this. Let's go and take it there. You know, whatever it is. And just asking the person, because I think maybe sometimes when a person comes with a problem, they don't know what they want.
Yeah.
They're just venting. And actually, if you ask them and go, you know what, actually, I do want a solution. Let's find a solution. Or I actually don't want a solution. I just want comfort. So, but it just reminded me of that.
The other word, or words, and this could be all, again, so this could be all someone takes from this conversation, is like what you've just shared, or what I'm about to share, and just try it and just see if things are different. Could you tell me more about that? So your friend says, I'm going through a breakup. I'm completely overwhelmed. I just don't know what to do. Could you tell me more about that? And it gives them space to figure out, because as you say, they probably don't know themselves what's going on, because it's their first time verbalizing it. And if it's really scary for someone to share what they're feeling, and I straight away go on to tell them what they should do, oftentimes people feel shame, then they almost want to curl up into a ball. And you know yourself when you're, well, for me at least, when I'm stressed and someone starts saying, do this and do this and do this, I'm like, the bucket's already full. Don't push me over the edge here, you know? So could you tell me more about that? Or the other thing you do is maybe just reflect back. So sometimes what we hear is different to what was said. So I might say, what I hear you say is you're really challenged by your partner, and she's got a promotion, and you feel like you're not doing enough, and she's the breadwinner now, and that makes you feel insecure. Can you tell me more about that? And you're not playing therapist. You're just giving someone a bit of space to. I shared with you before the podcast, there's this still face experiment that people can see on YouTube, and what it is it's a psychological experiment they've done for years, where a mother stands in front of a baby, and the mother's making funny faces and happy faces and smiling and playing peekaboo, and the baby's loving it. And then suddenly the mother just goes blank. So she goes into disconnection. She just blank face, blank stare at the baby. And you can see very quickly the baby gets agitated, gets anxious, gets overwhelmed, starts crying, starts screaming, is experiencing anxiety and disconnect. And it's interesting because it just shows that we're always mirroring each other. And when we are not met with, when we're not accepted effectively, we feel disconnected. And that's when men go into shame. And when men go into shame, they go into hiding. And when men go into hiding, eventually they end up doing stupid things to themselves, you know. So a lot of these things like porn addiction, gambling addiction, a lot of these things live in the dark. They live in shame because men are not getting a chance to share. And if someone can share, I'm addicted to porn. And someone, rather than giving solutions, can say, tell me more about that. That must be hard. I can feel how hard that is for you. Suddenly, you know, in the still face experiment, when the mother kind of comes back online and she starts making funny faces again, the baby has reconnection and they're like, oh, it's safe again. So we create that safety by meeting people where they're at, not trying to change them, but just, I get it, life is hard, and kind of giving them that space, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important for men to have other men in their lives that they can share these things with, because there's a lot of stuff that men aren't comfortable sharing with their partners.
Yeah, and
especially if it's about them, especially a lot of the time, a lot of men's issues can be to do with their partners. But even if there's stuff at work, they don't want to bring these things into the dynamic, especially if men feel like they need to be strong and competent and provide. And if they have worries, they don't want to show weakness to the ones that they're meant to be protecting. And then I think a lot of guys don't have any space to talk to that with anyone.
We got to set something up, I think, and see what we can do. It'd be nice. If you go back to the 4, the 5, like, there's the idea that we all mature biologically, so we look different to what we looked when we were 10 or 15 or 20, but psychologically we can get stuck. So if I learned at 5 that boys don't cry, and now I'm 35 and I still have that part of me that thinks boys don't cry, the reason I hid that part of myself was because it was shamed or it was made fun of. And it's like the mother disconnecting and not giving a healthy response to what's happening. If I can get into a space and I happen to cry and I'm not shamed, and people say, it's nice to see it. Like I heard that yesterday when I cried at this event. People say, it was so nice to see you let go. And you're like, oh, it's okay. It's like normal. I think that's how we heal. It's like we hid parts of ourselves because they were not welcome. And if we can welcome the parts that people are afraid to show, that's how you create, that's how you heal.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And I know that you have a plane to catch, so we don't have too much time left. But I want to cover it because you've mentioned it, and I know that it's something that is a big part of your work at the moment. But breathwork is something that you do a lot. Now, you've spoken about the Wim Hof method. Is that the primary sort of methodology that you use with breathwork?
So for like therapeutic breath work or like emotional release or kind of deeper breath work, I do something called conscious connected breath work. I run classes online every Thursday that are free if anyone wanted to try one. But the theory behind the breath work, conscious connected breath work is you connect the breath. So you breathe through an open mouth for about 40 minutes and you take big breaths in and relaxed breaths out, and no gaps or pauses between the breath.
All through the mouth.
All through the mouth. And obviously, day-to-day breathing, we're looking at nasal breathing. So that's the other side.
I know you've had Patrick on.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the Oxygen Advantage.
He's a great guy. He lives 10 minutes away from me, and I've qualified with Pat in the more functional breathing stuff. So that's the other side. But where the conscious connected breathwork is interesting is, again, mental health is oftentimes seen as, okay, this is what's going on in my head. But really, mental health relates to, for me at least, what's going on in the body. So every time we get stressed or we get anxious or we experience fear or anything, my boss shouts at me and I feel this energy within me, but I can't shout back. That sits in my body, and I clamp and I tense down and I hold all this armor. Like men hold armor in our bodies to like emotions. Sadness is a collection of sensations in my body, and if I don't allow myself to feel sad, I'll put literally armor around it, and my breath will stop. You think about when you're fearful, your breath stops. We know it instinctively. People, when you're stressed, people say, take a deep breath. So when we do this conscious connected breath and we keep the breath going, it can surface some of the old stuff, not in a bad way, but it can bring the emotions close to the surface. I've had guys that come in and they say, I hadn't cried in 30 years and I feel so much lighter for it. I've had, it's again a stretch for people I know, but I had a client recently he's only 30. His partner died last year, and he said he felt her come and connect with him at the end of the breath work. So it's kind of mystical, some of the stuff that can happen. And I was never into all this mystical, spiritual, shamanic stuff, but when I had challenges in my life and nothing else was working, I went to it. And I think it's interesting to be open to the mystery of like it all, not have to know it all. So that's the conscious connected breathwork. And then day-to-day breathwork is like oxygen advantage if you can. So I studied with Wim 7 years ago, and I came back from studying with Wim in Poland. And someone said, why didn't you just study with Pat? He's only 10 minutes away. And I was like, who's Pat? And then I hear about the oxygen advantage, and I've gotten...
But I feel like they're diametrically opposed.
Well, and that was my question at that time, because you do Wim Hof for 15, 20 minutes. And I said, what's the point in doing that for 15, 20 minutes if the rest of the day you're breathing like in a weird way? Like, how are you supposed to breathe? And that's what Pat's work is, like, how do you breathe day to day? And
for those who don't know, with the oxygen advantage, Pat McKeon.
Yeah.
I mean... I'd actually say that book has changed my life more than any other book I've ever read, just because like it's something that I carry with me 24 hours a day. Essentially, nasal breathing is the way to breathe. You breathe through your nose and your mouth for talking and eating. And that's essentially it. If anyone, I genuinely recommend it to every single person listening. I genuinely believe it's that important. When I first started doing it, my cardio on the mat increased within a week. And I literally remember one of my training partners going, what the fuck? Dan has cardio now? Literally about 2 or 3 weeks into me into me really focusing on nasal breathing only, even when I'm sparring. And one of the guys, I said, you got to get this book. My main training partner, he goes, bollocks. He buys the book, he reads it in a week, and he is an absolute convert, and we'll look at a guy and goes, this guy really needs to read the oxygen advantage. He's breathing through his mouth, he's out of shape, he's panting, and so just as a side note, anyone who is interested at all, I recommend genuinely oxygen advantage to everybody. If you don't want to read it, get it on Audible. It's not super long, and it can change your life pretty fast.
I'll link you up with Pat to get him on the podcast.
Oh, I'd love to.
He's over here a bit. And that's your day-to-day. LSD is the nice acronym that they have for that, the low, slow, and deep breathing. So just to remind people, like if they put their hand maybe below their belly button and see if you can get your breath all the way down through your nose. And then the connected breath work I mentioned, the 40 minutes of mouth breathing, that's solely for that time. And the idea is that low, slow, and deep activates parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest, effectively telling your body I'm safe, everything's okay. When we do the mouth breathing, we can activate actually a bit more of the sympathetic, which is the stress response. But we're choosing to go into, it's kind of like Wim Hof, you're choosing, it's different going out in the street and being attacked and going into a stress response because you have no choice versus choosing to go into the stress response. And so when we do the connected breath work, you're activating, you're bringing energy into the body, which can bring emotion to the surface, which isn't necessarily the purpose, but it can happen. So that's the short practice. And then, as you say, oxygen advantage is the way to go.
Yeah, but the breathing stuff is, it is fascinating because it's something that we all do all the time. And I think a lot of us naturally do it dysfunctionally, especially with the nose breathing stuff. Generally just not even thinking about it. I feel like that's one of the we're disconnected from so much of what we do, be it moving, like we sit in chairs and we sit in the car and like our posture's bad and this is bad, and the breathing dysfunction is just another thing that is kind of disconnected from how we're meant to, our evolutionary biology, how we're meant to live.
And I mentioned the mind-body connection earlier, this idea of mental health and how it ties in with emotional health. There is a cycle, if you will, like a vicious cycle in some ways, that there's a lovely phrase that says, our story follows our state. And what that means is the state of my body will dictate the story that I have about myself and about the world. So if I drink 10 cups of coffee and I haven't slept well and I'm a bit anxious, I will see myself in a certain way. Maybe I'll see myself as I am overwhelmed. The world is overwhelming. People are annoying. Maybe that's my stories. Because my body is in a certain way. If I'm in that low, slow, deep breathing and relaxed and comfortable, I am safe. The world is exciting. People are friendly. And so when it comes to mental health, again, if my only focus is on changing the stories, but my body stays in a dysregulated state of feeling unsafe, that's delusion, to tell someone, oh, you should be grateful. It's like, no, the person's in a fucking fight or flight response. Their body thinks that they're in trouble. So you got to get their body into a relaxed state, and then they can possibly be grateful. So I think this is the next thing in the next couple of years, like, is understanding the body's role in mental health and the breath, as you say, because the breath is the bridge. If my stories are that I'm not enough, it will cause me stress. My body will respond by breathing more shallow to take in more. And when I breathe more shallow, it feeds my story, and I just get caught in this. So oftentimes it's kind of like when you don't want to go to the gym, but you know you're going to feel better after. Sometimes when you're stressed, you're like, I don't want to fucking breathe deeply. It's not going to be any good. But if you breathe deeply, it can make an impact, you know.
And last thing, just before we have to get off, because it's something you mentioned a few times earlier, and I think that you probably have an interesting take on it, but the thing you mentioned is purpose or a mission. What does purpose mean to you, and what is its importance in the world?
I think purpose is everything. I guess a couple of things on purpose. One, I have a belief that growing up, or like going from boy to man or girl to woman, I think like growing up psychologically for me is about going into your wound. So the thing that was difficult when you were a child, the story that you came to believe about yourself. So mine was, I was bullied, we moved around a lot, I was always the new guy, so it was, I don't fit in, I'm not enough, people don't like me, I don't know how to connect with people. That was my wound. Growing up for me was about addressing that, and that's addressing it emotionally. So dealing with the anger that I had toward my bullies, dealing with the sadness that I had toward being rejected, dealing with the fear that I have around meeting new people. So it's dealing with those emotions. That's the initiation. And then, you know, Joseph Campbell talked about the hero's journey, which you're probably familiar with, which is we look across culture and we look across generations, and there's a typical story arc, whether it's Harry Potter or it's your favorite jiu-jitsu fighter that you look up to. Typically, you'll see a story where they had some kind of adversity and challenge. They went on a journey, they slayed their dragons and their demons, and they came back like a new person. They went through their initiation. So the end of that journey is you come back and you support the village with, you know, here's what I learned. So for me, it was wounded by feeling disconnected, like I wasn't enough, like I didn't fit in. A lot of my work has been about building communities in the fitness space, in the men's space. So I'm doing the thing that wounded me. I'm bringing medicine back to hopefully the community. And that's where I found my purpose. So, you know, my passion is connection and authenticity. And then my purpose is taking my passion and bringing it to a bigger group. And the piece, again, some of these words I think can seem grandiose, like purpose, like how am I going to find my purpose? And people get bogged down and caught up in it. I always think of it like layers of an onion, and I think that the purpose of life is to go through loads of initiations. So I did the fitness thing for a couple of years. It was everything to me. And then I woke up one day, I was like, something in me knew, okay, I've done what I need to do here. And I walked away from it when it was very financially lucrative and it was making lots of money. It was at its peak, but I was like, that doesn't fulfill me anymore. So that's like peeling a layer of the onion, and it's like, okay, what's calling me now? And then there's something else, and there's something else. So for anyone who's struggling with purpose or like would like to have a better sense, listen, create a bit of space for yourself, like do the Wim Hof breathing, or do something, take a day a week or a day a month where you go for a hike and you leave your phone off and just listen. And there's probably something in you saying, okay, I don't like my work. Okay, you don't have to quit your job, maybe just look into nighttime courses. So it's all about just taking a step. And I think my purpose 5 years from now will probably be the same, but I'll be doing it in a different form. You know, I think I'll have a jiu-jitsu gym, I hope someday, for kids and teenagers. That's the dream, I think. But it'll still be about community and bringing people together. So yeah, look at your wound. What did you not need? What did you not get that you needed? And can you bring that to the world in your own way? And can you be open to change? What's your thoughts on purpose?
Oh, Matt, I don't think I could follow that, to be honest with you. I think that you hit the nail on the head there. And I mean, even some things that I wouldn't have thought about, like it coming from something that you didn't get. I need to think about that myself. For me, what my purpose is actually not dissimilar, to be honest with you. Like I think I wanna teach jiu-jitsu and spread jiu-jitsu because I love it. But the thing that I love the most about it is the connections and the people and bringing people together through that. So yeah, I'm on the same page as you with that. But I think it's important. You need to have something driving you, and it doesn't have to be grand. It could be, I want to be a good father, or I want to be a good husband, or whatever else. But a man without purpose is lost at sea a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and that challenge, just to maybe end on, is I think our challenge is sometimes when we're maybe not fulfilled where we are, we can want to step straight into something else. Like there's kind of an impatience around it. Like when I was doing the fitness thing and I stepped away from it, of course I wanted to know what's the next logical step. Sometimes you're in that murky water of just being a little unclear, and I think it's been, not trying to rush into the next. It's kind of like leaving one relationship and going to the next because you're lonely. It's like maybe you need to be with the loneliness for a bit before the confusion or whatever it might be. So it's a journey.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that you said about going for a walk by yourself without your phone, that's, I've heard from a lot of people. I think there's a whole book about it, about it can put you in mind wandering. And how actually a lot of people, they never give, and this is something that I'm probably quite guilty of. I overstimulated. I like to listen to some stuff all the time, watch YouTube videos, and I love knowledge and I love learning things, and I feel like, why would I cook breakfast in silence when I can learn something at the same time? But then I think I almost run from silence a little bit, maybe a bit too scared of being with my own thoughts for too long. So I try and purposely put myself, and then you have the whole other discussion about modern man's fear of boredom. We're not allowed to be bored anymore because, how could we be bored in this world of screens and content? But apparently, one of the best things that you can do for creativity and for ideas and retrospection and thinking of the future is walk in silence and really let your mind wander and see what comes of it. I mean, I think that's a pretty good way to end. Is there any last closing remarks that you'd like to put out, Pat?
Just, sometimes I like to just not so much commit to things, but just to say it out loud. I think it would be lovely to try and organise an evening or a day in London for jiu-jitsu community, or for anyone that wanted to come along. We might do some kind of men's session, just a couple of hours. And
I'd love that. 100% keen on that. Sweet, absolutely. Pat, thank you very much for joining me, and it's been a long time coming. It was an absolute pleasure.
Appreciate you, bro.
Nice.
Thank you.
That is it, guys. I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you want to follow or find out more about Pat, then you can check out his website, which is patdivilly.com, or check him out on social media. His Instagram is @patdivilly. As always, if you want to follow myself, which I, of course, assume that you already are, but if you weren't and you wanted to, then you can find me on Instagram @raspberry_ape, or if you want to follow just the podcast, then @raspberryapepodcast. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode, or indeed this podcast in general, then please feel free to firstly share it. And if you really like it, then it would be great if you could go ahead onto iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen and leave me a glowing review. As always, thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you guys next time. Take it easy.